Hi, it's been a while, as usual. I probably mentioned in my last video that I started writing as a way to try and get my thoughts and feelings out, to try and understand them better, I guess. Which is basically the reason why I started doing these videos, so that kind of replaced doing this. But there's an idea that my mind has been kind of transfixed on recently, and I thought that maybe it would be useful for me to do another video like this so that I can work through it and I can ramble on about all of my thoughts in a way that's actually articulate and get a better understanding of it so that I can then incorporate it into my writing, I guess. So I'm hoping that in a way this video is going to be a little bit more focused and less aimless, because it's going to be within the context of how I might apply this to a character or an event that I could write about. The concept, I guess, is about free will, which is probably something that I've been thinking about at least a little bit for a long time. I might have even mentioned it in previous videos. But like I said, my mind is very fascinated by this idea lately for some reason. So I suppose it's trying to tackle the possibility that we don't have any free will, ultimately, and that every decision that we've ever made and ever will make is exclusively the result of our thoughts and feelings and instincts, none of which are controlled by us or dictated by us. Therefore, the decisions themselves are not really ours. Or if they are, then they are not decisions that we can actually control or manually manufacture in our minds. I think there is kind of a mindfuck, as most of these things are, I guess, trying to tackle this idea. I think that a lot of people maybe have this illusion of control over themselves because you have an awareness. You're sort of getting insight into at least a portion of the decision-making process that your consciousness goes through. And you can experience the thoughts and the feelings that you have that inevitably lead to every decision. And I guess that's kind of a more elaborate or complicated type of system that our minds have in comparison to what we assume other forms of life have. And because of that, it feels like it's more in some kind of way. I feel like wrapping your head around the conclusion that you have no free will when it really comes down to it, and that ultimately we're all just creatures of instinct is kind of weird, but you can get to that point pretty simply. I mean, it's not so simple, but I feel like if you contemplate it and you realize that what would have to be the case in order for you to be the one that is making the thoughts and feelings that appear in your mind manually, the self-aware part of your consciousness to be the thing that is dictating what thoughts and feelings occur. In order for that to be the case, surely you would have to simultaneously be aware of the infinite possible things that you could think or feel in any given moment, and then consciously make a decision on which of those infinite things you are going to think or feel in that moment. And then as soon as that moment passes, you have to then manually and consciously decide what the next thing you're going to think and feel out of the infinite possible things that you have to somehow be aware of simultaneously is going to be. And you're somehow doing that every second of every day for your entire life. As far as I can figure out, that's the only way that it could possibly make sense for you being the conscious, self-aware part of your mind, to be the one that's deciding what's happening, as opposed to it being the part of you that is on autopilot, the part of you that's purely instinctive and reactive. I feel like everybody should be able to surely recognize that they are not simultaneously aware of the infinite things that you could think and feel in any given moment, and that they're not deciding which of those things to think and feel as each moment passes. And even if you somehow were, surely the process of deciding what to think and feel would in of itself be another series of thoughts and feelings. So then you would have to figure out what it is that determines the thoughts and feelings that you think and feel that lead to the decision about what you're going to think and feel, which in of themselves would have to be another series of thoughts and feelings. So the further back you go, it becomes an endless cycle, and you have to accept the reality that at some point a thought or feeling has to just occur spontaneously, and that can't happen in the conscious part of your mind, or it can't happen from the conscious part of your mind. As I'm saying all of this, I'm getting kind of deja vu, so I don't know if that's just because I've rambled to myself so much about this in my head, or because I've mentioned it in a video in the past. I apologize if this is just me literally recreating a video that I've done in the past, but whatever. Anyway, I suppose the next step that you have to go through after you've come to that conclusion that you don't have any self-control, or free will, I guess is maybe a better term. You then have to go on to the next, maybe even more complicated step of the thought process about this topic, which is, what are the implications of that? Because it's all well and good keeping things purely conceptual and purely hypothetical and purely philosophical, but when it comes to the actual real life application of those philosophies and of these ideas and concepts, that's when things can get a little bit more complicated. And I suppose that's probably the part that I usually neglect, because usually I'm more than happy to just keep things as an idea and kind of ramble to myself about this basically pointless intellectual bullshit until I get bored and move on. But as I said, I'm trying to have a bit more focus with this video, because the context is I'm trying to figure out how I can apply this idea and concept to a character. And so I've got to think about what the implications of this would be. Let's say you are a person who comes to this conclusion that ultimately they have no free will, and nobody does. How would that affect a person? How would it affect their mind, their psychology, the way they live their life, the decisions they make? What would it mean to come to this conclusion? I mean, for me, it always feels like it's nothing more than a thought-provoking contemplation about this interesting idea. But within the context of a character who's living a life and in certain situations and going through certain things, I need to think about the effect that this kind of idea would have. So, I suppose there are different ways you can look at it, positive and negative, or maybe neither, in terms of the impact that this conclusion might have on a person. I suppose it would change the way that you think about yourself as a person. I feel like a lot of people, they go through life and they spend a lot of time thinking and stressing and worrying, and to some extent even driving themselves crazy about all of the different potential things that they could make a decision on, all of the different possibilities, all of the different options. They think about their life and what their life has been and what their life could be within the context of there being a correct path to go down in life, or a series of good decisions and a series of bad decisions that they could make in any given scenario. I feel like a lot of the time that can create disappointment, because people can think about some kind of hypothetical alternate reality where they made a different decision, and that different decision had a different result that would be preferable to whatever it is they actually did. And everyone looks at every stage in their life as having a million different directions you could go down, and you can only pick one direction, and whatever direction you picked will lead you to a specific place, and you have an infinite amount of potentially better places or worse places that you could have ended up in if you picked one of the different paths. And I think all of us could maybe relate to how it could be sort of like a weight off your shoulder if you come to the conclusion that at the end of the day there's only ever one path that you're going to go down. There's only ever one decision that you're ever going to make in every situation you're in life. And that decision is the decision that your mind is instinctively, reactively, automatically going to come to based on the random series of thoughts and feelings that it produces in the moment that it produces them. I think that they could almost create this very carefree sort of mentality and outlook on life, and this very kind of just go with the flow kind of vibe. If you did come to that conclusion that every decision I've ever made and every decision that I'm ever going to make was always going to be what it was going to be, when it really comes down to it, everybody's just going to do what they're inclined to do, assuming they're able to do so. And those inclinations are ultimately out of their control, because they are the result of thoughts and feelings that occur naturally and instinctively in the mind. And that the mind is just a byproduct of the brain. And the brain is a part of us in the same way that the heart is a part of us. It's an integral and important and essential part of us, but that doesn't mean that we can control it. You don't decide for your heart to pump blood around your body. You can't decide for it to stop pumping blood around your body. It just happens. It started happening the second you grew a heart in the womb, and it'll stop happening the second you die. It's just on autopilot. It's just a part of your body doing what it naturally does, instinctively and reactively. And we have this illusion that our mind and our consciousness is somehow more than that it's more complicated and that there's more to it, as if it's some kind of magical thing. But to me, it kind of feels right now like it makes more sense that it's not. It's definitely a little bit weirder because we're much more aware of our mind, and our mind and consciousness doesn't exist in like the tangible world. It doesn't exist in a space anywhere. It's not quantifiable or measurable in any kind of way. It's just this weird conceptual, ethereal thing that we just kind of constantly experience. So I suppose in a way it is more, or it is at least different, but maybe not so much so that it's should be treated any differently than the other organs of the body doing what they naturally do constantly. And like the heart, you can't switch your mind off. You don't decide to have this constant stream of consciousness, and you can't decide to not have it either. So I feel like coming to that acceptance could have a sort of positive effect on your mentality and the way that you look at yourself and you look at your life and you look at the world around you. It can sort of have this effect of you just accepting things for the way they are, accepting yourself for the way it is, and the life that you're living for the way it is, and every single thing that happens to you, whether it's your decision or not, I guess, as just being what it always was going to be. I suppose another thing that it would maybe change your outlook on would be other people, not just yourself, because everybody else has this uncontrollable stream of consciousness just like you. I suppose it would probably alleviate a lot of potential frustration and anger and hatred that you might naturally feel towards people because of the things that they do and the way that they are and what they are. I mean, if you're like hiking up a mountain and you get attacked by a bear, sure, you might not be happy about being attacked by a bear, but you don't hate the bear. I mean, I guess some people would, but a lot of people... One second. My lights died, so I had to go and charge them again. I think I was talking about bears for some reason. If a bear attacked somebody while they were hiking, they might not be happy about the situation, but I think most people probably have the opinion that they don't hate the bear for it. They understand the bear is just acting instinctively. They don't hold the bear to the same standards as they would a human. If a human attacked them, then they would probably hate the human, because they consider the human to have the ability to think through their actions, to think about it and decide whether or not what they're going to do is going to affect the other person negatively. That they have the ability to contemplate the morality of what they might do, and therefore come to the conclusion or the understanding that what they're about to do is wrong or is going to affect the other person negatively. So I feel like coming to this conclusion that there is no such a thing as free will ultimately, and that humans themselves are nothing more than creatures of instinct, just like the bear, would allow people to be much less hateful and to look at people, no matter what they do, no matter what the results of their decisions are, as just doing what they are naturally, instinctively inclined to do. And even though you might not be happy about what they do, and you may still go out of your way to stop them from doing what they want to do, or to, I guess, have some kind of conflict with them, it doesn't mean that you need to hate them. It doesn't need to be that toxic, negative emotion involved. You have this sort of understanding and acceptance that my inclinations happen to clash with this other individual's inclinations. And so we're both going to do whatever we can to make sure that whatever we want ends up happening, assuming they are not, they can't possibly coincide. Again, I feel like that's a much more kind of peaceful, is peaceful the right word? Maybe. Mentality to have. However, coming to this conclusion that there's no such thing as free will also has its negatives, obviously. Its potential negatives, I guess. So, in terms of the way that you would view yourself as an individual, I feel like the negatives would be potentially that it could act as an enabler for people to make decisions that negatively impact themselves and others around them. I suppose this gets into another kind of complicated aspect of this, which is, even if you come to the conclusion that it's objectively true that there is no such thing as free will, it could still be true that believing that you have free will is the better way to go, even if it's a lie, even if it's not true. Because the mind surely reacts to itself just as much as it reacts to its environment. The thoughts and the feelings that your mind creates are a reaction to the things that happen around you, your environment, as well as itself. If you're walking down the street and you hear a song, that might trigger a series of thoughts and feelings based on the music that you hear. But then the thoughts and feelings that you're constantly having are themselves something that your mind is going to react to. So, if you have the belief that you don't have any free will, and that you are not the one that can dictate whatever decisions you make, and you go through your life being very aware of what you consider to be the reality that you can't control yourself, really, when it comes down to it, that belief, which in of itself is just another thought, is something that your mind is going to react to generate additional thoughts and feelings that will then lead to decisions. So your belief that you either have free will or that you don't is going to have a pretty massive impact on the decisions that you make, whether or not it's actually true that you have free will. So you could come to the conclusion that believing that you don't have free will, whether it's true or not, if it's even something that you could be true about, is something that would negatively affect you or generally be considered a bad thing, because it might cause you to end up making decisions that would negatively affect yourself and other people. If in any given moment you have the inclination to do something that might end up going on to negatively affect you or others, then a lot of the times there might be a resistance to that inclination. Your mind might have the initial thought to do something, but then it will react to that thought with additional thoughts and feelings that might then lead you to decide to not do what you were initially inclined to do. We all know what it's like to think about doing something and then decide not to do it, and then maybe decide to do it again, or maybe flip-flop forever and never make any kind of decision. However, if you have this belief, this strong belief that you have no free will, and an inclination comes into your mind to do something, then maybe all of the thoughts and feelings that may have naturally occurred that would stop you from doing whatever it is that you were inclined to do would not appear, because of this belief that you have no control and that you're ultimately going to do whatever you're inclined to do at the end of the day anyway. And therefore there's less resistance to any of your inclinations that then leads to you making decisions that are negative for you and others around you. Suppose you could argue that the opposite could also be true, to go back to the potential positive effects. If there is less resistance to you doing whatever you're naturally inclined to do, that could actually lead to you making decisions that are positive for you and positive for the people around you. Suppose you could say that resistances to certain inclinations could actually lead you to making decisions or not making decisions that would negatively affect you and others. So I guess that's maybe like a 50-50 one. But I suppose it depends on the type of person you are and what kind of natural inclinations you have. So, once again, trying to keep this whole thing somewhat focused instead of allowing myself to just aimlessly ramble too much in terms of how these ideas might be able to be implicated into a character that I'm writing. Whether or not this is a positive or negative thing would probably depend on the character in question and on what their inclinations would be. Then again, I suppose no matter who it is, it's going to be both positive and negative, because everybody has inclinations that are going to go on to have positive and negative effects to themselves and other people. And then of course, getting into a whole other topic, whether or not your inclinations are positive or negative or inherently subjective themselves, but that's a different kettle of fish. Anyway, moving on to how coming to the conclusion that you don't have free will may negatively affect your view on other people. I think it's true that on one hand it can give you this less hateful mentality towards other people, because you realize that they're just creatures of instinct like you, and you don't hold every single human in the world to some extremely high standard of being 100% responsible for every decision that they ever make. In a way, it could also create kind of like a dehumanizing effect as well. Like, if a tornado comes through and destroys your entire life, you don't hate the tornado because you view it as nothing more than a force of nature. You know, the tornado just is what it is. It's being what it is. It does what it does naturally. It's reacting to its environment. It exists for as long as it exists until it doesn't. And again, we view humans as being more than that. You know, we're sort of like somehow special compared to other forms of life and forms of non-life. Somehow our thoughts and feelings and our consciousness gives us this illusion that we're above all of that, that we're more than just things that are instinctively reacting to our environment and to our own existence for as long as we exist until we stop existing. But of course, one way to look at it is that that's not the case, that every person in the world, including yourself, is nothing more than a completely unpredictable, uncontrollable force of nature that is going through its own tiny, insignificant little piece of time and space, doing whatever it's naturally inclined to do until it stops existing. And while having that mentality towards other individuals, like I say, could maybe make you less hateful, could maybe make you more accepting of the people around you and the things that they do, even if the things they do affect you negatively, a potentially negative impact it could have would be for you to have a completely dehumanized outlook on other people. It can make you stop putting people on a pedestal above everything else in existence, which, as little sense as that might make, again, even if you want to come to the conclusion that it's objectively true that humans are nothing more than other forms of life and other forms of non-life, that every human is nothing more than this force of nature, even if that is objectively true, which again is of course debatable, believing that it is a whole different kettle of fish. The implication of what that mentality might have in terms of your place in a society and who you are as an individual is kind of massive. I mean, believing that people are not special, essentially, could once again lead you to make decisions that will affect them in a much more negative way, assuming your inclinations might lead you to do certain things like that. One of the things that might create a resistance in a person's mind to not steal from someone or hurt someone or betray someone or any one of the many, many things you could potentially do that would affect somebody else in a negative way. A lot of the resistance to not do those things, even if you're initially inclined to do so, even if you're in someone's house and for whatever reason you see something valuable and you instinctively think, I could steal that thing and I want to because it's going to benefit me. Your mind will then react to itself in that moment. And for a lot of people, there will be a set of thoughts and feelings that will resist the initial inclination and will say, no, I shouldn't do it because it's wrong and because it will upset this person and maybe there will be consequences for me and blah, blah, blah. But if you see people as nothing special, nothing more than any other form of life, nothing more than the tornado that is just a thing that exists for as long as it does until it doesn't. If you have this like very cold, I guess almost like weirdly scientific look at people, you know, nothing more than a collection of atoms floating through the world, doing whatever they naturally do, then that would potentially remove a lot of the resistances that you would have to inclinations that might lead you to do things that will affect other people in a negative way. So I suppose again that really depends on the individual in question in terms of how bad this kind of mentality might end up being. It would depend on what types of inclinations they might have. But I suppose the point is that coming to this conclusion and having this belief that there is no such thing as free will has a series of potential positive and negative effects on the way that an individual might look at the world, look at themselves, look at other people, and will definitely affect the decisions that they make. I think I quite like that this isn't an inherently positive or negative belief to have, and it's not so easy to pinpoint whether it's a positive or negative thing to believe. I think most likely what I'd try and do is have this be kind of like the final conclusion that a character comes to after a long series of events and different sets of beliefs that are one side and another, and that ultimately in the end they kind of come to this conclusion that they have no free will, that every decision they ever made and every decision they ever will make and every decision everyone else they've ever encountered and ever will encounter in their life has made or will make is nothing more than an uncontrollable and instinctive reaction, and that's going to have its own set of positives and negatives for that individual. This always happens when I make these videos. I get so deep into the rabbit hole of whatever idea I'm fixated on, I kind of lose myself. I feel like this video is probably pretty long by now, so I should probably wrap it up. I think this is a pretty interesting concept, and if anyone who's watching this, not that I make these videos for you as I make them for myself, but since there's going to be a few people that will watch it, if any of you have any unique outlooks that I haven't discussed in terms of reasons why people may come to the conclusion that there is free will or that there isn't free will that I haven't already discussed, or the effect that coming to either of those conclusions would have on an individual in general, or in terms of their outlook on themselves, or their outlook on other people, or their outlook on life or the world around them, that I haven't already mentioned in this video, I would be interested in reading about those insights. I don't have high hopes for that, because even though I don't really read comments that much, I have skimmed comments in my previous videos, and I feel like, generally speaking, people don't really have a good understanding of what the fuck I try and say. For example, one of my previous videos, I'll talk about nihilism as an intellectual and philosophical topic to explore. And I felt like almost all the comments were just people trying to give me like emotional support, telling me like to keep my chin up and everything's gonna be okay and I am important and you are special, don't worry, type shit. I feel like they misunderstand. Like, I didn't make that video as some kind of weird cry for help. It didn't come from an emotional place. I wasn't making that video because I felt like I was worthless and useless and pointless and I really needed someone to change my mind about that. It was an exploration of a philosophical and intellectual idea that my mind was fixated on at the time. And I was just exploring the idea, trying to get a better understanding of it, you know. So I don't really have high hopes for people actually giving me, I guess, what I interpret as unique insights into this topic. And that's not necessarily your fault. It's probably more down to me not being able to articulate and explain myself that well, or down to the fault is, I guess, maybe the fault of the topic itself being inherently very difficult to talk about and explain and understand and be on the same wavelength with. I mean, it's all very, very conceptual shit that doesn't necessarily have any kind of objective truth or answer or cathartic light at the end of the tunnel, you know. But I thought I'd throw it out there just in case anyone does have any fresh ideas that I might find interesting. Okay, I think I'm done now. Bye.